The greatest threats were once not armies, but creatures born from our deepest fears. Ancient myths used encounters with legendary beasts to explain human courage, and these stories were far more than simple monster tales. They were the original blueprints for bravery, a symbolic language that taught entire societies what it truly meant to be heroic. By the end of this journey, you will see your favorite myths in a completely new light, uncovering a universal framework for facing any fear. What secrets of valor are hidden within the jaws of a dragon? And how could a riddle from a sphinx forge a hero's spirit? What if the most terrifying beast you ever face is not in a story, but within yourself? Think of the world before maps, before streetlights, before the reassuring hum of a distant city. For our ancestors, the edge of the village was the edge of everything safe and understood. Beyond that line lay the wild, a place of profound mystery where the rules of daily life simply did not apply. It was into this vast unknown that myth poured its most potent fears, giving them shape, scale, and a heartbeat. The deep forest did not just contain wolves, it housed something older and wiser, a spirit of the woods that demanded respect. The churning ocean was not merely water, but the domain of leviathans who could summon storms with a flick of a tail. These were not random monsters, they were careful creations. Each legendary beast was a landmark on a psychological map, marking the territory of a specific human fear. Creatures stood at thresholds, guarding sacred groves, hidden treasures, or profound knowledge. Their role transformed a simple physical confrontation into a spiritual and societal rite of passage. The beast became a living test, and passing it meant you were worthy of what lay beyond. The classic example is the Sphinx that plagued the city of Thebes. She did not attack with claw and tooth, but with a riddle. To pass her, to enter the city as a savior, the hero Oedipus had to demonstrate a different kind of courage, intellectual bravery, and self-knowledge. His victory was not about strength, but about wisdom, about looking inward to solve an external threat. This pattern repeats across cultures. In Norse legend, the dragon Fafnir coils atop a vast, cursed treasure. The young hero Sigurd must slay him, but the story is far less about the battle and far more about what comes after. Claiming the hoard brings not instant joy, but a heavy burden of knowledge, moral complexity, and tangled fate. Sigurd's courage is tested not just in the act of killing the dragon, but in navigating the consequences, a perilous journey from naive youth to a more somber, enlightened adulthood. The guardian beast, therefore, is a gatekeeper of transformation. Its test forces the individual to confront internal shadows, doubts, and temptations. Do you have the wisdom to solve the riddle? Can you resist the corrupting allure of the treasure you win? The courage required here is layered. It is the courage to master one's own mind and spirit. By framing bravery this way, ancient myth sent a clear message: true evolution, whether becoming a king, a sage, or simply a mature adult, requires passing through a trial that changes you from within. The monster at the gate is a mirror, and looking into its eyes means first confronting what you see in yourself. This idea transforms the hero's journey from a simple adventure into a blueprint for personal growth, a concept that echoes every time we face a daunting challenge that requires us to think, to learn, and to grow before we can proceed. Yet this inner journey was only one half of the equation. The second archetype of the mythic beast operates on a scale so vast it reshapes reality itself. This is the chaos monster, a force of pure, undifferentiated disorder that exists before the world begins. In creation stories across the globe, the founding act is not a gentle song or a quiet thought, it is a courageous battle. The Babylonian epic Enuma Elish gives us the quintessential example. Before the heavens and the earth, there was only the swirling, salty waters of chaos, personified as the great dragon Tiamat. The younger gods, seeking to establish order, found themselves powerless against her primordial rage. It fell to the god Marduk to accept the challenge. His victory was not merely a military triumph, it was an act of profound creation. From Tiamat's dismembered body, Marduk fashioned the cosmos, her ribs becoming the vault of the sky, her eyes forming the sources of the great rivers, her tail curving into the Milky Way. This is the ultimate reframing of courage. Here, bravery is not a defensive reaction, but the very spark of civilization. The hero does not simply destroy a threat, he dismantles chaos itself to build a structured, knowable world. This pattern echoes from the icy realms of the Norse, where the gods slay the frost giant Ymir to craft the earth from his flesh, to the watery depths of many Polynesian traditions, where islands are fished up from a boundless ocean. The message is universal and staggering: the stability we take for granted, the rhythm of the seasons, the laws of society, the very ground beneath our feet, all of it was born from an audacious act of defiance against formless terror. This mythic lens teaches that courage is a fundamentally creative force. It suggests that to build anything meaningful, a family, a community, a peaceful life, you must first have the fortitude to confront the surrounding disorder and impose your own pattern upon it. Every time someone chooses to act with principle in a confusing situation, or to establish a new system where none existed, they are participating in this ancient, world-shaping drama. The Chaos Monster reminds us that harmony is not a default state, but a hard-won achievement, continuously maintained by countless small acts of human bravery against the quiet pull of entropy. Yet the most profound evolution of this idea turns the gaze completely inward. After the guardian at the threshold and the chaos of the cosmos, the third archetype asks a more unsettling question. What if the most dangerous beast does not live in a cave or a churning sea, but within the human heart itself? This is the internalized beast, a brilliant narrative device that externalizes our own capacity for darkness, jealousy, or despair. Here, the hero's ultimate test is not to conquer a foreign monster, but to face the reflection of their own potential for savagery. The Old English epic of Beowulf offers a masterclass in this concept. The hero travels to aid King Hrothgar, whose great hall is terrorized not by a foreign army, but by Grendel. This creature is described as a descendant of Cain, the biblical figure who committed the first murder out of envy. Grendel is not merely a strong monster, he is a walking embodiment of exile, of violent jealousy, of the isolation that festers into hatred. He attacks the hall precisely because he cannot bear the sound of human joy and fellowship within. Beowulf's battle, then, is not just a physical contest. It is the light of community, conscience, and law confronting the howling shadow of alienation and primal rage. His courage represents the societal choice to defend its bonds against the forces, both external and internal, that would tear them apart. This theme deepens in many Native American traditions with figures like the Wendigo. In these stories, the Wendigo is not a random predator of the forest. It is a spirit born from extreme hunger and desperation, a transformation that can overtake a person who resorts to unspeakable acts to survive. The Wendigo is the ultimate warning, a parable about how circumstance and choice can turn a human into a monster. The courage required here shifts dramatically. It is no longer about strength in battle, but about strength of character. It is the moral fortitude to endure hardship without surrendering your humanity, the self-mastery to resist the corrupting hunger that promises survival at the cost of your soul. These myths demonstrate a stunningly sophisticated grasp of psychology. They understood that fear and rage, if left unexamined, could take on a life of their own, becoming internal beasts that dictate our actions. By projecting these struggles onto a legendary creature, Storytellers gave people a framework to recognize and name their own inner conflicts. The lesson was clear: true bravery often means staring into that internal abyss and making the conscious, difficult choice to step back, to choose compassion over fury, community over isolation, hope over despair. This introspective turn completes the ancient blueprint for courage. First, you face the external test that forces growth. Then, you confront the chaotic forces to build order. Finally, and most crucially, you turn inward to ensure the builder, the hero, remains worthy of the world they are trying to create. This symbolic language was written directly onto the body of the beast itself. Every claw, scale, and terrifying gaze was a deliberate piece of instruction, a clue left by ancient storytellers about how to face the fear it represented. To understand the monster was to decode a manual for bravery. Take the dragon, a near-universal symbol. Its most famous feature is not its fiery breath, but its impenetrable hide, those diamond-hard scales that render ordinary weapons useless. This was not just a detail to make the creature scarier, it was a narrative puzzle box. The lesson embedded in those scales is clear: conventional force will fail. Courage in this scenario cannot be mere aggression, it must be paired with ingenuity. The hero must become a strategist, studying the beast, learning its habits, searching for the one vulnerable spot. This transforms the battle from a test of strength into a test of wit and perseverance, teaching that the most daunting obstacles often require a creative solution, a unique approach no one else has tried. Then there is the Hydra, a creature designed to teach a lesson about the nature of certain problems. You attack one of its many heads with a sword, a direct and forceful solution, only to watch in horror as two more sprout in its place. The symbolism here is profound. It represents those challenges in life that seem to grow larger the more directly you fight them. A conflict that escalates with every angry word, a hardship that spawns new difficulties faster than you can solve them. The myth provides the answer through the hero Heracles and his companion Iolaus. Heracles realizes brute force is futile. He adapts. With Iolaus cauterizing each neck stump as a head is removed, they stop the regeneration. The lesson is one of adaptive courage, the bravery to change tactics, and crucially, the wisdom to accept help. It teaches that some fears cannot be faced alone, and that true strength lies in collaboration and a willingness to try a new method when the old one fails catastrophically. Perhaps the most psychologically astute design belongs to creatures like Medusa or the basilisk, whose power lies in a direct gaze that paralyzes or turns the observer to stone. This is the embodiment of fears that freeze us in our tracks, anxieties so potent that confronting them head-on feels impossible. The myth, however, does not say the hero must simply be brave enough to look. Instead, it offers a brilliant workaround. The hero Perseus uses a polished shield as a mirror, viewing Medusa's reflection to navigate close enough to strike. This is a masterclass in circumspect courage. It acknowledges that some terrors are too overwhelming to face directly. The courageous act becomes finding another angle, using a tool like metaphor, reflection, or indirect support to approach what would otherwise be paralyzing. It validates that bravery is not always a frontal assault. Sometimes it is a sideways glance, a clever detour that still leads to resolution. By analyzing this symbolic anatomy, the ancient audience received a nuanced diagnostic toolkit. The beast's form answered the most urgent question: what kind of courage does this situation demand? Is it the strategic courage to find a new way, the collaborative courage to seek aid, or the circumspect courage to approach from an unexpected angle? This layered guidance ensured that myths were not one-note tales of violence, but sophisticated psychological primers, offering a different key for every locked door of human fear. The anatomy of the beast revealed what kind of courage was required, but the story did not end there. Ancient myths were remarkably honest about the sources of that bravery, showing it as something often assembled, not simply born. The lone warrior standing before the dragon is an iconic image, but look closer at the story, and you will almost always find a toolkit beside him. This toolkit contained everything from divine gifts to simple cleverness, and each item served a purpose, teaching that courage is a resource we can cultivate. Take the concept of divine aid. When the goddess Athena gives Perseus a mirrored shield to face Medusa, or when a deity offers a magical sword, it is not just a plot convenience. This intervention symbolizes the courage that comes from outside ourselves, the strength we draw from faith, from mentorship, or from the simple, fortunate break that arrives at the right moment. It represents the idea that we are not alone in our struggles, that sometimes bravery is activated by a guiding hand, a piece of wise counsel, or the comforting belief that the universe itself might be leaning in our favor. Then there are the physical tools, the iconic weapons. Heracles wields a massive club, Arthur draws Excalibur from the stone. These are not just instruments of force, they are powerful symbols. They represent the courage that comes from mastery and preparation. The club is the weapon of a hero who has trained his body to its peak, whose courage is backed by proven skill. Excalibur is even more layered. It is a weapon of sovereignty, linking the hero's personal bravery to a larger heritage and destiny. These tools teach that nerve is bolstered by competence, that feeling prepared is a legitimate and powerful form of courage. Perhaps the most fascinating tool in the ancient kit was not a weapon at all, but a quality of mind, the Greek concept of metis, or cunning intelligence. This is where the mythmakers truly expanded the definition of valor. Consider Odysseus in the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus. Direct combat against the giant would have been suicide. Instead, Odysseus uses his wit, getting the monster drunk, blinding him with a sharpened stake, and escaping by hiding under sheep. His courage was entirely strategic. It was the bravery to stay calm under pressure, to think several moves ahead, and to use deception as a legitimate tool for survival. This reframes heroism completely. It says that outsmarting a superior force is not cowardice. It is a higher form of courage, one that prizes the preservation of life and the achievement of a goal over a meaningless, glorious defeat. When you combine these elements, a beautifully holistic picture of courage emerges. It is not a single, superhuman trait possessed by a chosen few. It is a flowing current fed by many streams. Inner resolve provides the initial spark, but it is sustained by accrued skill, by the support of allies or tradition, and very often by the flexible, creative intelligence to find a path where none seems to exist. This multifaceted approach was deeply reassuring to ancient audiences. It democratized bravery. It suggested that you did not need to be the strongest person in the room to be courageous. You could be the wisest, the best prepared, the most supported, or simply the cleverest. The mythic hero's journey, therefore, becomes a masterclass in resource gathering, showing that before you face the dragon, you must first assemble the tools that will make your courage effective. The dragon's symbolic anatomy reveals a stunning truth, that its very design was a cultural instruction manual. Nowhere is this clearer than in the vast gulf between the dragons of the West and the dragons of the East. They are not variations of the same creature, they are fundamentally different beasts, each sculpted to teach a completely distinct brand of courage. In the misty highlands and stone castles of medieval Europe, the dragon emerged as the ultimate adversary. It was a creature of hoarding and destruction, a fire-breathing serpent coiled atop a stolen treasure or menacing a helpless village. Its very existence was an affront to the social and spiritual order. The legendary Battle of St. George exemplifies the Western ideal. Here, courage is externalized, active, and purifying. The knight's valor is a martial force, a direct and physical confrontation against a clear, monstrous evil. The goal is not negotiation, but eradication, slaying the beast to rescue the innocent and restore a disrupted peace. This form of bravery celebrates the individual hero who confronts chaos with unwavering force, a reflection of societies that often define themselves through conquest and the defense of a sacred, bounded community against external threats. It is the courage of the sword, decisive and absolute. Now cross the world to ancient China, and the dragon transforms entirely. Here, it is not a monster to be slain, but a celestial being of immense wisdom and power. Associated with life-giving water, rainfall, and the harmonious cycles of the cosmos, the Eastern dragon is a benevolent force, a symbol of imperial authority and natural balance. In these stories, the concept of courage undergoes a profound shift. The heroic act is rarely about defeating the dragon. Instead, it is about understanding it, earning its respect, or harmonizing with its power for the greater good. A tale might involve a scholar or a virtuous leader who must navigate a drought by performing a ritual to appeal to the dragon king of the waters, demonstrating piety and deep knowledge of celestial protocols. Courage here is diplomatic, reverent, and aligned with a larger natural order. It is the bravery of patience, of study, and of placing the needs of the community and the environment above a rash, confrontational act. This frames the highest valor as an act of integration, not destruction, a reflection of cultural philosophies that emphasized harmony with nature and the cosmic flow. By placing these two majestic creatures side by side, we see the mythic encounter as a vibrant canvas where each culture painted its deepest values. The definition of the most courageous action was not universal. It was a direct expression of a society's worldview and its relationship with the world. The Western dragon, born from landscapes where wilderness was often an enemy to be tamed, taught the courage of dominion. The Eastern dragon, born from agricultural societies deeply dependent on the unpredictable benevolence of rivers and rains, taught the courage of symbiosis. One legend champions the hero who brings order through force. The other honors the hero who fosters prosperity through wisdom and respect. This contrast does not suggest one culture was braver than another. Rather, it reveals that bravery itself is a multifaceted jewel, and each civilization polished a different facet to a brilliant shine, illuminating the specific path their people were meant to walk. Even the most celebrated victory could leave a lasting mark. This is where ancient myths added a crucial layer of truth, a sobering acknowledgement that true courage almost always came with a steep and personal price. The stories refused to let heroes simply ride off into a peaceful sunset, because the communities that told them understood a profound reality. Confronting a great fear does not leave you unchanged. It transforms you, and that transformation can carry its own weight. The tales wove in wounds, both physical and psychological, not as failures, but as integral parts of the heroic journey, teaching that bravery is as much about enduring the aftermath as it is about the initial act. Consider the Greek warrior Philoctetes. He was the trusted friend who lit the funeral pyre of the great Heracles, and as a reward, he inherited the hero's legendary bow and poisoned arrows. These were tools of immense power, symbols of a legacy of courage. Yet, on the voyage to Troy, Philoctetes suffered a terrible accident, a snake bite that festered into a wound that would not heal. The injury made him an outcast, left alone on a deserted island for years because his companions could not bear the pain and the odor. His story is a powerful parable about the cost of association with heroic power. The very tools that could ensure victory also carried a latent danger, and bearing them meant accepting the risk of profound isolation. His courage was not just in wielding the bow later, but in surviving the long, lonely years of his exile, a testament to endurance when the immediate glory has faded. This theme of a double-edged courage appears vividly in the Irish epic, The Táin. The hero Cú Chulainn, defending his homeland alone against an entire army, would enter a state known as the warp spasm. In this battle fury, his body would contort terrifyingly, and he became an unstoppable force of nature. But this fearsome power came with a devastating cost. After the frenzy passed, he would be left completely exhausted, so weak he had to be immersed in 3 successive cauldrons of water to cool his fevered body. The narratives show his comrades having to straighten his limbs with large beams to return him to his normal shape. Here, the myth presents courage not as a clean, controlled virtue, but as a raging fire that could consume the one who wielded it. It acknowledges the self-destructive potential of unchecked martial fury, a warning that the very qualities that make a defender formidable can also leave them broken and vulnerable. The hero pays for his supreme moment of valor with a period of profound depletion, reminding listeners that peak strength is often followed by a necessary time of recovery and care. These wounds and sacrifices served a deeper purpose than mere dramatic tragedy. They added a necessary realism and depth to the tales, moving the hero from a state of innocence into one of experienced and often burdened wisdom. The encounter with the legendary beast was a threshold, and crossing it meant you could never fully return to who you were before. A physical scar became a permanent reminder of the confrontation. A period of exile, like that of Philoctetes, represented the sometimes painful distance that grows between the hero and the ordinary community they have saved. They now carry knowledge and memories others cannot fully share. This narrative layer taught a sophisticated lesson. The courage to face the beast must also include the courage to bear the resulting transformation. The hero might gain a kingdom or eternal fame, but they also shoulder a new weight, a responsibility forged in the heat of their ordeal. This might be the trauma of what they witnessed, the loneliness of their unique perspective, or the solemn duty to use their hard-won power justly. By weaving in this cost, the myths humanized their champions. They became figures to admire not because they were invincible, but because they were resilient. They showed that an act of bravery could be a point of no return, an irrevocable step on a path that leads away from simple comfort toward a more complex, and sometimes heavier, destiny. The true triumph was not emerging unscathed, but emerging wiser, carrying the proof of the struggle as part of your new identity. But the hero's lonely vigil was only one side of the ancient story. A different kind of mythic encounter unfolds when the beast's shadow falls not on a single champion, but across an entire community. In these narratives, courage transforms from a personal trial into a shared project, a collective breath held by a whole tribe or city. The legendary Nemean lion, with its golden fur that turned aside every spear and arrow, was not merely a target for a strongman. It was a regional catastrophe, a creature whose very existence meant no shepherd could tend his flock, no traveler could walk the roads, no family could feel safe beyond their own walls. The terror was communal, and so the solution, even when delivered by a single figure like Heracles, was framed as a public service. His legendary labor was not a quest for personal glory, but a necessary act of civic restoration. The courage he demonstrated was a resource he spent on behalf of others, reinforcing a powerful idea that valor has a social function, and the bravest individual is one who turns their strength outward to shield the many. This concept of shared courage finds its ultimate expression in partnership. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh offers a masterful example. When the king Gilgamesh decides to confront Humbaba, the monstrous guardian of the distant cedar forest, he does not go alone. He is joined by Enkidu, a wild man crafted by the gods to be his equal and counterbalance. Their journey is the heart of the story. They bolster each other through moments of doubt, facing the terrifying aura of the forest and the physical might of the beast not as solitary figures, but as a united front. Their combined courage is something entirely new, a force greater than the sum of its parts. Slaying Humbaba is a feat neither could have accomplished alone, teaching that some fears are so vast they require a synergy of spirits, a braiding together of different strengths to form an unbreakable cord. These myths served a vital social purpose. By depicting heroes acting for the community or in powerful alliance, storytellers were reinforcing the bonds that held society together. They were illustrating, in the most dramatic terms possible, that the survival of the group depended on the willingness of its members to act for the common good. The hero, in this light, becomes a symbolic stand-in. He embodies the collective courage required of every farmer, every parent, every craftsman to maintain the fragile order against chaos. The story whispers a crucial lesson. When the beast threatens the whole tribe, the response cannot be scattered panic or isolated despair. It must be a coordinated act of defiance, whether that means supporting a chosen champion, joining arms with your neighbor, or simply holding the line at home so others can venture forth. This narrative framework turned abstract civic duty into a gripping, memorable saga. It taught that courage could be contagious, that one person's brave stand could ignite the resolve of an entire people, and that facing down existential threats was ultimately a project for us all. The hero's journey, for all its solitary trials, was never the only path through the mythic woods. A different current of courage flowed through these ancient stories, one that wore a distinctly feminine face. This was a valor that did not always roar from the throat of a warrior, but could speak in the whisper of the huntress, the chilling riddle of the crone, or the serene fury of a goddess protecting all of creation. The Greek deity Artemis stands as a perfect emblem of this alternative power. She was no queen confined to a glittering palace, but the eternal protector of the untamed wild, of young creatures, and of the moonlit frontier. Her courage was one of sovereign independence, the fearless choice to claim the vast, dangerous forests and mountains as her rightful domain. To follow Artemis was to embrace a bravery rooted in self-sufficiency, in a profound kinship with the natural world that required no conquest, only respect and understanding. She represented the courage to define one's own space and purpose outside of traditional structures, to find strength not in dominating the wild, but in moving through it as its guardian and its embodied spirit. Yet the feminine face of courage could also appear in forms that were deliberately unsettling, designed to test the seeker in more profound ways. Consider the Lamia of Greek folklore, a figure often reduced to a child-stealing monster. Her origins, however, tell a story of profound loss transformed into a cautionary power. In some versions, she was once a queen who suffered the unthinkable loss of her children, and in her grief, she was twisted into a being that preyed upon the young of others. While her later tales are terrifying, they carry a buried lesson about the protective, and sometimes destructive, ferocity of maternal love pushed to its absolute extreme. Similarly, the Slavic Baba Yaga is not a simple villain. She is a bony-legged hag who lives in a hut that walks on chicken legs, surrounded by a fence of human bones. She might devive the unprepared, but for those who approach her with the correct rituals, respect, and nerve, she becomes a source of ancient wisdom and magical aid. Her tests are not of strength, but of character, manners, and psychological fortitude. To face Baba Yaga and earn her help required a courage steeped in humility and cultural knowledge, a bravery that acknowledged power could reside in the most fearsome of vessels, if one had the discernment to see it. This concept culminates in figures where feminine courage is not an alternative, but the universe's ultimate defensive force. In Hindu tradition, the goddess Durga was created from the combined radiance and weapons of all the gods, a collective answer to a threat none could face alone, the shape-shifting buffalo demon Mahishasura. Durga's image is iconic, a multi-armed goddess serene in expression yet dynamic in action, riding a lion into battle. Her courage is not aggressive but profoundly protective, a righteous and unstoppable response to a cosmic imbalance. She does not seek the fight, she embodies the necessary answer to a force that endangers the world's order. Her valor is both nurturing and terrifying, a reminder that the fiercest protection can be an act of divine love. Through Durga, Artemis, and even the ambiguous Baba Yaga, myths systematically expanded the blueprint of bravery. They presented courage as defensive, as wise, as deeply connected to the cycles of life, death, and the natural world. These stories taught that valor could wear the calm mask of the huntress, the wrinkled visage of the oracle, or the serene countenance of the universal mother. They insisted that the most formidable power and the profound courage required to wield it justly was often embodied in feminine form, guarding the thresholds of wilderness, wisdom, and cosmic balance with a different but equally essential kind of strength. The creature's lair is never just a physical space, it is a cultural echo chamber. This is where the mythic beast performs its most subtle and revealing role, acting as a dark mirror held up to the society that imagined it. The monster often becomes a symbolic container for the collective fears, unspoken flaws, or repressed shadows of an entire civilization. Its form and story reflect not just a random terror, but a specific cultural anxiety begging to be addressed. To face such a beast was to force a society to look at a part of itself it would rather keep hidden. The legendary Minotaur of Crete offers a profound example. This creature, born from a queen's transgression and the wrath of a god, was no ordinary monster. It was the unnatural offspring of royal desire and divine punishment, a living secret. King Minos did not cast it out, he imprisoned it at the very heart of his power, in an impossibly complex labyrinth beneath his own palace. The Minotaur was not just a beast to be feared, it was a truth to be contained. It represented the terrifying consequences of royal overreach, the hidden costs of maintaining power, and the labyrinthine secrets that can fester at the core of any great civilization. When the hero Theseus volunteers to enter the maze, his courage operates on two levels. On the surface, he is confronting a flesh and blood monster, but symbolically, he is navigating the tangled, dark corridors of a corrupt and secretive political order. His victory is not merely a physical kill, it is the cutting of a cultural knot. By slaying the Minotaur, Theseus symbolically confronts and masters the repressed shadows of Minoan society, freeing its tributary states from a cycle of sacrificial tribute born from that hidden shame. The beast was a mirror, and the hero's act was one of societal catharsis. This pattern of projection repeats across time and landscape. Consider the werewolf legends that haunted the forests and villages of medieval Europe. These were not tales of distant monsters, but of terrifying proximity. The werewolf was often a neighbor, a farmer, or a soldier transformed under the full moon. This creature embodied a deep-seated cultural fear about the fragility of civilization itself. It asked a haunting question: how thin is the veneer that separates a pious man from a ravenous beast? In times of war, famine, or social collapse, when the normal rules dissolved, this fear felt terrifyingly real. The werewolf myth gave form to the anxiety that the beast was not outside the walls, but sleeping within every person, waiting for the right or wrong conditions to awaken. Facing such a creature, therefore, demanded a courage that was profoundly introspective for the entire community. It was the courage to acknowledge the capacity for savagery within their own hearts, and to consciously reaffirm the laws, rituals, and bonds that kept that inner wolf at bay. The act of hunting the werewolf was, allegorically, the continuous work of maintaining a just and orderly society against the ever-present pull of chaos and base instinct. Through this interpretive lens, the ancient storytellers reveal a stunning psychological insight. The monsters we collectively fear most are rarely arbitrary. They are magnified projections of our shared anxieties. A culture terrified of the untamed wilderness will conjure beasts of the deep forest. A society grappling with the moral complexities of power and secrecy will birth a minotaur in a labyrinth. A community fearful of its own potential for violence under pressure will imagine the werewolf, The legendary encounter then becomes a form of symbolic therapy. By creating a narrative where a hero confronts this embodied fear, the culture practices the act of facing its own shadows in a safe, structured space. The civic courage modeled is not the courage of battle, but the courage of self-examination. It is the difficult, ongoing bravery required to look into the cultural mirror, to acknowledge the reflection staring back, and to choose, day after day, to build a world where that reflection grows a little less monstrous. Even the most fearsome monster can hold the key to a hero's ascension. This brings us to one of mythology's most sophisticated lessons, the Transformation Trope, where the ultimate act of courage is not destruction, but redemption. In these nuanced stories, the beast is not an end, but a beginning. Its power, once understood and mastered, becomes the very tool that elevates the hero. Consider the birth of Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse. He did not descend from the clouds in a burst of divine light. He sprang forth from the blood of the slain Gorgon, Medusa, a being whose gaze turned men to stone. Here, a moment of terrifying violence gives birth to a symbol of poetic inspiration and heroic travel. The monster's end catalyzes a new form of nobility, teaching that within our greatest fears can lie the seeds of our highest aspirations. The hero Bellerophon later tames Pegasus, not through force but with a divine bridle, a symbol of respectful partnership. Their alliance allows him to achieve the impossible, soaring to defeat the monstrous chimera. This is courage redefined as an act of alchemy, transforming the raw, chaotic energy of a terrifying origin into a focused, elevating force. This theme of the beast as a source of power is woven deeply into warrior traditions. The Celtic hero Cu Chulainn, whose very name means Hound of Culan, gained his iconic spear, the Gíbolg, not from a smithy, but from a realm of supernatural instruction tied to martial forces. His legendary warp spasm, that terrifying battle fury, is itself a kind of internal beast he must harness and unleash. The weapon and the fury are both destructive gifts with a monstrous pedigree, and his courage lies in bearing them, in channeling that ferocious power toward a protective purpose without being wholly consumed by it. He does not kill the beast within, he rides it into battle for the sake of his people, a precarious and costly mastery we explored earlier. Perhaps the purest expression of this transformative courage appears in journey tales across the globe, where a direct confrontation leads not to a corpse but to a covenant. Countless stories from the forests of Siberia to the plains of Africa follow a similar arc. A traveler encounters a ferocious animal, a bear, a wolf, a great cat. Instead of a panicked fight, the hero meets the creature's gaze, perhaps offering a sign of respect, sharing food, or speaking to it with clever, calming words. Through this act of nerve and presence, the dynamic shifts. The snarling adversary lowers its head. The beast that was a threat becomes a guide, leading the lost traveler through treacherous terrain, or a guardian, protecting them from other dangers in the wild. This trope teaches that courage can be profoundly diplomatic. It is the bravery to stand your ground without raising a weapon, to project calm in the face of primal rage, and to recognize a potential ally where everyone else sees a mortal enemy. The lesson embedded here is one of integration over annihilation. It suggests that the goal of confronting our fears is not always to obliterate them, for some powers are too potent to simply destroy. The true test may be to face them, understand their nature, and find a way to bring that formidable energy under your command. This is the courage of the visionary leader who sees potential in the unruly outsider, or of the wise individual who learns to harness their own turbulent emotions into creative drive. It reframes strength not as the capacity to dominate, but as the wisdom to convert a threat into a source of power. To look into the eyes of a legendary beast and see not just a monster, but a future ally, requires a depth of perception that is itself the highest form of valor. These ancient blueprints for bravery did not fade with the last campfire story. They were etched into the very foundations of our greatest literary epics, traveling across centuries and continents to find new expression. The core pattern remained, a hero facing a formidable other, but the nature of the beast and the quality of courage required began to transform, reflecting deeper spiritual and philosophical questions. We can trace this evolution through two profound examples, one from the misty halls of the north and another from the serene groves of the east. In the Old English epic Beowulf, the hero's entire life is framed by three monumental encounters, each demanding a different facet of valor. His first great feat is the battle against Grendel in Heorot Hall. Here, courage appears in its most primal and celebrated form, the raw, youthful strength of a warrior who chooses to grapple a monster bare-handed, defending a community not his own. It is physical, direct, and glorious, but the story does not let him rest there. Grendel's mother, seeking vengeance, pulls him into a second, far more harrowing conflict. This fight descends into a submerged, otherworldly cave, a realm of murky water and ancient blood feuds. The courage here is more complex, a grim perseverance in a hostile environment where the rules of the surface world no longer apply. It is the bravery to follow terror into its own home. Finally, decades later as an aged king, Beowulf faces his third and final beast, a dragon awakened by a stolen cup. This is no longer the courage of a young champion seeking fame, but the solemn, sacrificial duty of a protector. His strength is waning, he knows the odds are against him, yet he goes forth alone because his people are threatened. His final act completes the arc, transforming courage from a personal attribute into a legacy, a gift of security purchased with his own life. The epic meticulously charts how true bravery must mature, adapting from physical might to dutiful sacrifice across a lifetime. A world away, in the Buddhist Jataka tales, the definition of courage undergoes a radical, inward revolution. These stories recount the past lives of the Buddha, where he practiced the perfect virtues leading to enlightenment. In one famous tale, as a prince named Mahasattva, he comes upon a starving tigress so weakened by hunger she cannot feed her own cubs. Moved by boundless compassion, the prince makes an astonishing decision. He offers his own body to the tigress so she may live and nourish her young. There is no battle, no weapon, no victory in any conventional sense. Here, the formidable force is not a monster's rage, but the overwhelming suffering of another being. The courage required is the ultimate relinquishment of the self, a fearless generosity that places the welfare of all creatures above the survival of the individual. This redefines the heroic encounter entirely. The beast is not an adversary to be conquered, but a being in desperate need, and the highest bravery is the strength to offer one's own flesh out of love. This is courage as transcendent compassion, a spiritual valor that seeks not to defeat life's harshness, but to absorb it willingly for the sake of others. From the mead hall to the mountain grove, these literary evolutions reveal the stunning adaptability of the core myth. The legendary beast, whether Grendel, a dragon, or a suffering animal, remains the indispensable catalyst. It is the unwavering mirror that forces a definition of greatness, but what we see reflected in that mirror changes profoundly. In one, we see the societal ideal of the king warrior, whose courage evolves into stewardship. In the other, we see the spiritual ideal of the bodhisattva, whose courage dissolves the very boundary between self and other. Both traditions preserve the essential lesson that character is forged in the encounter with the formidable, yet they guide that forging toward different ends, one cementing a legacy for a people, the other seeking liberation for all beings. This shows the pattern was never about the monster itself, but about the endlessly flexible human heart, using the oldest of stories to ask anew, what is the highest form of strength we can aspire to? The stories did not end when the fire burned low. Their true power was unleashed when a community stood up not to hear the tale but to live it. Across the ancient world, the mythic blueprint for bravery was woven directly into the fabric of ritual and ceremony. This was courage removed from the realm of distant legend and placed into the hands and bodies of everyday people. Through symbolic reenactment, the abstract lesson became a felt experience, a memory forged not in the mind, but in the muscle and the shared heartbeat of the tribe. For a young person on the threshold of adulthood, the initiation rite was often a deliberate echo of the hero's labors. In many cultures, a boy becoming a warrior might be required to spend a night alone in the wilderness, a direct confrontation with the untamed wild that had once been the domain of legendary beasts. Or he might face a masked elder portraying a forest spirit or a totemic animal, a symbolic duel where proving his mettle meant earning his place as a protector. These were not mere tests of endurance, they were profound psychological passages. By successfully navigating this orchestrated trial, the initiate did not just hear about courage, he performed it. He stepped into the symbolic skin of the hero, internalizing the pattern that fear could be faced and passed through, transforming his own identity in the process. The ritual provided a safe container for a dangerous transition, using the myth as a script to guide the individual from one state of being to another. This collective performance of courage expanded to encompass entire communities, especially during pivotal moments in the yearly cycle. Consider the vibrant dragon dances of Chinese New Year or other Asian festivals. The undulating, multi-person beast weaving through streets is not a monster to be feared, but a force of nature to be harmonized with. The dancers underneath the elaborate costume work in perfect unison to guide its energy, leading it to bring blessings and scatter misfortune. This is a living, breathing reenactment of the ancient partnership with the dragon's power, a ritual where the community collectively practices the courage of cooperation and cosmic balance. Similarly, in many European traditions, the end of winter was marked by festivals where an effigy representing the harsh season, often imagined as a beast or a frost giant, was ritually defeated, burned, or driven out. This was not simple celebration, it was a symbolic act of communal courage. By together confronting and banishing the embodiment of darkness and cold, the people reaffirmed their collective power to bring back the light and ensure the fertility of the land. They were acting out the oldest story of all, the victory of order and community over chaos and isolation. In that shared moment of ritual triumph, every participant, from the elder to the child, felt a surge of collective agency. They were not passive listeners to a myth, they were active agents in its cyclical renewal. The psychological genius of these ceremonies cannot be overstated. They allowed entire communities to rehearse bravery. In a controlled, symbolic space, people could experience the rising tension of a threat, the collective focus required to confront it, and the cathartic release of its resolution. This created a powerful emotional and social template. When a real hardship arrived, a drought, a conflict, or an outside threat, the community did not face it with a blank slate. They faced it with a deep, embodied memory of what it felt like to stand together and overcome. The ritual had carved a neural and social pathway for courageous action. The abstract values of the myths, loyalty, resilience, sacrifice, became tangible through shared action and sensory experience. The beat of the drum, the flicker of the fire, the united movement of the dance. This ensured the transmission of these values was not a lecture, but an inheritance felt in the bones, a legacy of courage passed down not through scrolls, but through sacred play. The circle from story to ritual and back again was complete, each generation learning to wear the hero's resolve not as a crown, but as a second skin, ready for when the symbolic beast ever took a more tangible form. The timeless confrontation in the myths finds a startling echo in the quiet chambers of the modern mind. A revolutionary way to understand these ancient blueprints emerged not from an archaeologist's trowel, but from the clinical observations of psychology. The pioneering work of thinkers like Carl Jung gave us a new vocabulary for a very old truth, proposing that the dragons and serpents of legend are not relics of a superstitious past, but living symbols of our own inner landscape. Jung identified a crucial part of the human psyche he called the shadow. This is not a monster in a cave, but the sum of all the qualities, impulses, and memories that we, as individuals or as a culture, have repressed, denied, or simply failed to recognize in ourselves. It contains our hidden capacities for anger, envy, selfishness, or fear, aspects we often disown and project onto others. From this vantage point, the mythic beast is no longer an external predator, but a stunningly accurate projection of the personal and collective shadow, given flesh and fang by the storyteller's art. The hero's journey into the wilderness to face the creature transforms into the most vital human journey of all, the process Jung termed individuation. This is the lifelong path toward psychological wholeness, where we gradually confront and consciously integrate these disowned parts of ourselves. The courage required is internal, a brave and honest inward gaze. The battle is not for a treasure or a kingdom, but for self-awareness. When we re-examine the myth of Perseus and Medusa through this lens, its genius deepens exponentially. Recall that looking directly at Medusa turns a person to stone, a perfect metaphor for how confronting a deep, unprocessed trauma or fear head-on can paralyze us, freezing our emotional growth. Perseus does not charge in blindly. He uses a polished shield as a mirror, viewing the Gorgon's reflection to navigate safely. This becomes a profound allegory for the therapeutic process itself. We often cannot stare directly at our deepest wounds or shadow aspects without being overwhelmed. Instead, we approach them indirectly, through reflection, in the safe container of a conversation, through creative expression like art or writing, or by observing patterns in our relationships. The mirrored shield represents all these reflective tools that allow us to examine our inner monsters without being destroyed by them, to integrate their power without being consumed. This psychological interpretation does not diminish the ancient myths. It validates their profound intuition. It suggests that our ancestors were not merely explaining thunderstorms or wild animals. They were intuitively mapping the terrain of the human soul. The legendary beast was a diagnostic tool, a way to give form to the formless anxieties within. The prescription for courage embedded in every story, the act of turning toward the fear rather than fleeing, remains one of the most vital directives for psychological health we have ever inherited. It teaches that wholeness is not the absence of a shadow, but the honest acknowledgement of its presence. The monster in the story and the shadow in our psyche both hold a strange, rejected power. By facing them, we do not destroy a part of ourselves, we reclaim it. We take back the energy we used to keep it locked away and make it available for our growth. In this light, every time we muster the courage to acknowledge a personal flaw, to sit with a difficult emotion instead of numbing it, or to apologize for a mistake, we are reenacting the oldest heroic cycle. We are entering our own labyrinth, shield in hand, to integrate a piece of our own mythic beast. The lair was never in a distant forest. It is the uncharted territory of the self, and the treasure it guards is our own complete, authentic being. The mythic beast was not always a mirror for the self, but sometimes a messenger for the world itself. A deeper layer of these ancient stories reveals the creature as an ecological allegory, a manifestation of nature's overwhelming power and a direct response to human arrogance. The courage demanded here shifts dramatically, from conquest to correction, from dominance to delicate restoration. The Greek tale of the Caledonian boar presents this idea with stark clarity. When King Oeneus neglected the proper sacrifices to the goddess Artemis, protector of the wild, his punishment was not a lightning bolt from the sky. It was a beast unleashed upon the land. The boar was no ordinary animal. It was a force of divine retribution, with tusks like swords and a temper that laid waste to crops, livestock, and any who dared oppose it. The kingdom's plight could only be resolved by a collective effort, a band of heroes gathering not for glory but for survival. Their courage was the coordinated action required to mend a broken covenant, to rectify a specific transgression against the natural and divine order. The hunt was an act of desperate rebalancing, a lesson that true bravery sometimes means having the fortitude to clean up a mess of one's own making, to face the terrifying consequence of a forgotten respect. This pattern transforms creatures like dragons from simple hoarders into vital guardians. In countless traditions, dragons are found coiled around sacred springs, deep within primordial forests, or atop mountains that touch the clouds. They are not merely occupying these places, they are embodying them. The dragon's fiery breath and impenetrable scales symbolize the raw, terrifying power of a healthy ecosystem, a system that gives life just as easily as it can take it away. To approach such a dragon for water or passage was not an act of war, but a ritual. It required offerings, clever negotiation, or proofs of purity. The courage here is one of profound humility, the strength to approach a greater power not with a raised sword, but with an open hand and a recognition of one's own small place within a vast living tapestry. These stories taught that the environment itself possesses a kind of consciousness and agency in mythic terms, a force that must be engaged with reverence. To blindly dominate such a force was to invite catastrophe. To treat it as a partner was to ensure prosperity. In an era defined by environmental crisis, this ancient allegory rings with a chilling and urgent clarity. The legendary beasts of old, the punishing boar, the territorial dragon, the spirits of forest and river, were narrative vessels for truths our ancestors understood instinctively, that nature is not a passive resource but an active participant in the human story. The greatest courage our myths now ask of us may be the most difficult to muster. It is not the courage to fight the monster, but the courage to stop creating it. It is the bravery to live in sustainable harmony with the world we once mythologized as monstrous, to see the dragon not as an enemy to be slain, but as the ancient, breathing spirit of the very systems that sustain us. The true heroic quest for our time becomes the collective, coordinated effort to restore balance, to rectify the transgression of neglect, and to approach the natural world with the humility and respect our oldest stories always demanded. The very land a people walked upon gave form to their nightmares. Geography was not merely a setting for these myths, it was the sculptor's clay. The specific, tangible fears of daily survival in a harsh environment were projected onto the most mysterious and treacherous parts of the local landscape, creating region-specific beasts that taught site-specific courage. For a culture, the monster was a direct reflection of the land's most unforgiving face. Maritime peoples, whose lives were bound to the capricious sea, populated the abyss with its ultimate rulers. The Vikings did not just fear rough waves, they envisioned Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, a creature so vast it encircled the entire world, biting its own tail. Its stirrings were said to cause tidal waves and tempests. To sail into the North Atlantic was to willingly enter its domain. The courage modeled in their sagas was not about slaying this serpent, for that was a fate reserved for the end of days, but about the steadfast resolve to navigate atop it, to respect its power while daring to chart a course across its back. This was a bravery forged in salt spray and long darkness, the fortitude to push into a horizon that promised either new land or a watery grave. In stark contrast, the myths born under a relentless sun took a different shape. For desert-dwelling peoples, the great terror was the land itself, a vast, waterless expanse that could erase paths and hope with equal ease. Here, beasts often emerged from the environment's most deceptive and violent phenomena. Stories told of entities born from the swirling gin of sandstorms, or monstrous mirages that lured the thirsty to their demise. These creatures embodied the desert's dual nature, its ability to both mesmerize and annihilate. The required courage was one of keen perception and endurance, the strength to distinguish truth from illusion, and to persevere across a shimmering void where landmarks lied, and the very air was an enemy. Meanwhile, for cultures nestled against the deep, primeval forest, the wilderness was a wall of tangled green mystery. This was the realm of beings like the Slavic Leshy, a spirit lord of the woods who could lead travelers astray, make the path shift, and command the beasts within. The forest was not empty, it was intensely, watchfully alive. Courage here was not about crossing an open expanse, but about penetrating a dense, suffocating labyrinth. It was the bravery to step under the canopy where light grew dim, where every rustle could be a predator or a protector, and where getting lost meant becoming part of the wild forever. These localized beasts served a profoundly practical purpose. By rooting the monster in a real, familiar, and dangerous place, the myth made the lesson of courage immediate and actionable. It provided a narrative framework for confronting the environmental hazards people actually faced. A young Viking hearing of Jörmungandr was not just hearing a fantastical tale. He was absorbing a story that contextualized his own future voyages, validating the very real fear of the deep while glorifying the act of setting sail despite it. A child in a forest village learned from tales of the Leshy to pay attention to landmarks, to show respect in the woods, and to understand that some paths were not meant to be taken. This geographical grounding transformed abstract fear into a story of potential mastery. It taught that courage is inherently contextual. The steady, navigational bravery needed to cross a trackless ocean is fundamentally different from the alert, adaptive courage required to travel a dark, whispering forest, or the patient, resilient courage demanded by a blinding desert. Each landscape posed its own unique psychological and physical test, and the myths of the place provided the archetypal model for passing it. The monster was a personification of the land's challenge, and the hero's journey was a map written in allegory for how to survive it. That final confrontation was never meant to stay in the ancient world. The hero's path, with its monstrous encounter at the very heart, has traveled through time to become the invisible scaffolding for nearly every story we tell about growth and change. This universal template, which scholars like Joseph Campbell later mapped as the hero's journey, reveals the mythic beast's most enduring legacy. Campbell outlined stages like the call to adventure and the meeting with the mentor, but the pivotal moment, the supreme ordeal, often takes the form of a monstrous confrontation. It is the belly of the whale, a symbolic point of no return where the hero is swallowed by the unknown and must fight their way out, forever changed. This pattern resonates across millennia not because it is a clever plot device, but because it is a psychological truth dressed in legendary skin. We instinctively recognize its rhythm in our own lives. The journey begins with a departure from the familiar, a step away from comfort and safety. Then comes the central trial, the confrontation with our own personal beast, whether it is a daunting career challenge, a period of profound loss, or an internal struggle with doubt. The return is not to the same self, but to a transformed one, bearing the hard-won treasure of wisdom, resilience, or a new sense of purpose. Modern narratives are simply this ancient blueprint speaking a contemporary language. In J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, the quiet comfort of the Shire is left far behind for a perilous journey whose climax is a confrontation with Smaug, a dragon of immense greed and cunning, guarding a mountain of treasure. Bilbo's entire adventure is a process of becoming, and facing the dragon is the ultimate test of the courage and ingenuity he has slowly cultivated. In the cosmos of Star Wars, the monstrous confrontation is both literal and symbolic. Luke Skywalker must descend into the dark, tree-like labyrinth of Dagobah to face a phantom of Darth Vader, only to see his own face inside the helmet, a brilliant echo of the mythic beast as a mirror of the self. The alien creatures in the cantina or the rancor in the pit are not random monsters. They are manifestations of the galaxy's chaotic, dangerous wilds that the hero must learn to navigate. Recognizing this deep-rooted pattern does something powerful for us. It allows us to reframe our own modern struggles not as random hardships, but as chapters in a personal epic. That difficult project at work, the recovery from an illness, the act of starting over, these are not merely problems to be solved. They are modern-day quests. The anxiety, the obstacle, the seemingly impossible hurdle, that is your personal beast, your own unique version of the guardian at the threshold. Understanding its mythic ancestry empowers us. It tells us the fear is part of the design, that the feeling of being in over your head is the belly of the whale moment, and that the transformation you undergo in facing it is the entire point. The ancient myth teaches that the journey itself, fueled by courage in the face of the shapeless unknown, is what forges identity and purpose. We are not born with a fully formed character, we earn it through ordeal. Every time we choose to move toward a fear instead of away from it, we are participating in this timeless ritual of becoming. The treasure was never just the gold in the dragon's hoard or the princess in the tower. The real treasure is the person you have to become to claim it. This is the timeless truth encoded in the oldest stories, a truth that whispers to us still, that our most formidable encounters with beasts both legendary and deeply personal are not interruptions to our story. They are the very things that write it, a fossilized femur the size of a tree trunk unearthed by a farmer's plow, an enormous skull with a single cavernous eye socket found in a seaside cliff. For our ancestors, these were not just bones, they were physical proof. The ground itself was giving up the remains of monsters. This is the archaeology of the imaginary, where the tangible world provided the very bones upon which myths were built. Long before paleontology gave us the word dinosaur, people encountering such immense, petrified skeletons had to make sense of them with the vocabulary they had. A mammoth skull with its central nasal opening could easily be seen as the one-eyed face of a cyclops. The sprawling ribs of a prehistoric whale might become the framework of a dragon's wings. These natural discoveries were not dismissed as curiosities. They were integrated into the living narrative of the world, becoming the skeletal evidence that legendary beasts had once walked the earth, and by implication could perhaps do so again. This material evidence made the stories feel immediate and grounded. The courage to face such a creature was not abstract. It was a practical necessity for a world that had demonstrably produced such wonders. This process of giving form to fear is etched permanently into humanity's oldest art. In the Palace of Knossos on Crete, vibrant frescoes from over 3,000 years ago depict the griffin, a majestic guardian with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. This was not a casual doodle, it was a formal, repeated symbol of royal and divine power, painted onto the walls of a center of civilization. Centuries later and a world away, the brilliant blue bricks of Babylon's Ishtar Gate were adorned with the Mushasu, a fantastical dragon serpent with the head of a snake, the front legs of a lion, and the hind legs of an eagle. These were not hidden illustrations, they were public declarations, monumental art that codified the beast into the very architecture of the city. By visually standardizing these creatures, art performed a crucial function. It moved them from the realm of fleeting campfire stories into the permanent cultural record. Everyone who passed through that gate or walked those palace corridors received the same visual instruction. This is what the formidable looks like. The consistency of the image across generations taught a consistent lesson about the nature of the power one might have to confront. What we see here is a powerful feedback loop between discovery and narrative, a cycle that breathed life into the legends. Imagine a group of Neolithic hunters stumbling upon the gigantic, unfamiliar bones of a woolly rhinoceros weathering out of a riverbank. The find would spark awe, debate, and inevitably story. Was this a beast slain by a god in the Age of Origins? Could its kin still lurk in the northern wastes? That single, physical discovery seeds a new tale, a story of a heroic encounter with a creature of ice and thunder. That story, told and retold, becomes folklore. The folklore inspires a shaman to wear its likeness in a ritual, or an artist to sketch its imagined form on a cave wall. The art and ritual then reinforce the story, making it more real for the next generation, who might themselves one day find another strange bone and think, "Ah, the ice beast was here." This loop reveals a world where the mythical and the real were not separate categories, but intertwined layers of experience. A strange sound in the forest was not just the wind, it could be the breath of the Leshy. An oddly shaped stone was not just a rock, it was a dragon's tooth. The world was literally enchanted, brimming with signs and remnants of immense, mysterious forces. For ancient people, this porous boundary made courage a daily, vital practice. If the landscape itself held the bones of dragons, then the courage to explore, to build, and to protect was not metaphorical. It was a direct response to a genuinely wondrous and dangerous cosmos. The heroic archetypes in the stories provided the script for this engagement. When you ventured into a new valley, you were metaphorically walking into the dragon's territory, and you carried yourself with the respect and readiness that such a journey demanded. The physical artifacts, the art, the discovered bones, all served as constant reminders that the world was larger, older, and more full of potential marvels and terrors than everyday life might suggest. They anchored the myths in a shared, sensory reality, making the lessons they taught about bravery, respect, and cleverness feel not like optional philosophies, but like essential survival skills for a world that was always whispering of its hidden, magnificent inhabitants. But the path of the hero was not always a straight line toward a glorious victory. Sometimes the most challenging lesson of all arrived when the storytellers dared to blur the lines, turning the fearsome beast into a figure of tragedy, and the triumphant hero into a complicated, even questionable figure. This narrative twist forces a profound evolution in the very definition of courage, moving it from a physical contest into a deeply moral and psychological labyrinth. Here, bravery is no longer about who is stronger, but about who is right, and whether strength alone can ever justify an action. The ancient Greek myth of Arachne presents this dilemma with stunning clarity. Arachne was a mortal weaver of such sublime skill that she dared to challenge the goddess Athena herself to a contest. Her tapestries were not merely beautiful, they were acts of breathtaking artistry. When Athena could find no flaw in the mortal's work, her divine pride transformed into a rage that condemned Arachne to a life forever transformed, cursed to spin and weave not on a loom, but from her own body as a spider. In this story, the so-called monster is not a rampaging beast, but a victim, a testament to talent punished by unjust power. Where, then, does courage reside? It lives in Arachne's defiant act of creation itself, in the mortal's fearless assertion of her own genius against an implacable divine authority. The audience is left not cheering a slaying, but mourning a profound injustice, and the courage they must now practice is the courage of critical thought, of questioning the very structures of power that label one being a monster and another a god. This moral ambiguity deepens in one of the most famous encounters of all, Odysseus and the Cyclops Polyphemus. For generations, the tale has been celebrated as a masterpiece of cunning, the hero's clever escape from a brutal, man-eating giant. Yet if we pause and shift the perspective, the narrative fractures. Polyphemus is not hunting in the lands of men. He is in his own home, tending his flocks in a pastoral routine. Odysseus and his crew are the trespassers, the invaders who help themselves to the Cyclops' cheese and lambs. When Polyphemus responds with horrific violence, it is born from a violation of the most sacred ancient laws, the duties owed to a guest and the rights of a host. The monster has a legitimate grievance. This does not excuse his actions, but it complicates them immensely. Odysseus's celebrated cunning, his blinding of the giant, and escape under the bellies of sheep remains an act of brilliant survivalist courage. Yet the myth, in its fuller telling, refuses to let him off the hook. As he sails away, Odysseus's pride compels him to shout his true name back to the blinded Polyphemus, an act of hubris that brings down the wrath of Poseidon and dooms him to years of wandering. The story holds both truths in tension, the courage of the clever survivor and the moral failing of the proud victor. What these nuanced myths teach is that the highest forms of courage often operate in a field of grays. They demand a bravery that is introspective and empathetic. It might be the courage to show mercy when you have the upper hand, to stay your hand because you understand the pain that created the rage. It could be the courage to question your own mission, to wonder if the treasure you seek is worth the cost to those you label as obstacles. Or, most challengingly, it could be the courage to recognize a shared spark of consciousness in the eyes of the other, to see not a monster, but a being with its own story, its own losses, and its own right to exist. This advanced lesson showcases the stunning moral sophistication of ancient storytelling. It reveals that our ancestors understood conflict was rarely simple, and that true heroism required not just strength of arm, but strength of character, a conscience capable of navigating the confusing terrain where justice, survival, and compassion collide. To face a beast you must destroy is one kind of test. To face a beast you might, in some way, understand, requires a courage that reaches toward the very heart of what it means to be human. We still speak of slaying our own private dragons. That phrase is not a casual cliché. It is the living echo of a 3,000-year-old story, now whispered in boardrooms, therapy sessions, and quiet moments of personal resolve. The mythic beast has shed its scales and fire, but its essence remains, transformed into the universal metaphor for any formidable internal struggle. When we say we are facing our demons, we are invoking the same narrative architecture that once described Hercules in the swamp fighting the Hydra. We have simply internalized the lair. Your looming deadline, a difficult conversation you have been avoiding, the persistent whisper of self-doubt, these are the modern descendants of the guardian at the threshold. They block your path forward, and they demand a specific kind of courage to pass. The ancient framework provides a startlingly practical map. First, you must identify your beast with the clarity of a mythic cartographer. Is it a Hydra-like problem at work where solving one issue seems to spawn two more? Then the myth teaches you that raw force will fail. You need a new strategy and perhaps a trusted ally to help cauterize each new head as it appears. Is it a Medusa-like fear, a past hurt or anxiety so potent it feels paralyzing to look at directly? The legend advises against a frontal stare instead. Find your reflective shield, approach it through writing, through metaphor, or in the supportive reflection offered by a compassionate listener. This is not pop psychology repackaged as folklore. It is folklore recognized as foundational psychology. Our ancestors spent centuries refining these stories into symbolic training manuals for the human spirit. They understood that courage is not a vague feeling of bravery, but a targeted skill, and the nature of the beast dictates the technique required to engage it. By naming your challenge as a specific type of mythic encounter, you do something powerful. You move from being a victim of circumstance to the protagonist of your own story. You are no longer just stressed, you are a hero navigating the labyrinth of a complex project. You are not merely anxious, you are a traveler learning to respect, but not be frozen by, the gorgon of a past memory. This reframing is itself an act of courage, the first step in the oldest cycle of all. It allows you to consciously gather your resources, your modern-day divine aid. That could be the mentorship of a wise colleague, the steady support of a friend, the accumulated skill from past experience, or simply the quiet faith that you have navigated dark forests before. You prepare your toolkit not with a sword and shield, but with research, a plan, deep breaths, and a reminder of your own resilience. Then you engage not with blind fury, but with the strategic courage the myth prescribes. Perhaps it is the diplomatic courage to negotiate rather than fight, the collaborative courage to ask for help, or the circumspect courage to approach a painful truth from a gentle angle. The ultimate gift of this ancient metaphor is the permission it grants to see your personal struggles as part of a grand, human tradition of growth. You are not failing because you face a dragon. You are participating in the very process that forges character. Every time you choose to move toward a fear instead of away from it, you are reenacting the hero's call. The treasure you seek might be a promotion, a mended relationship, inner peace, or simply the knowledge that you can withstand the fire. The victory is never the absence of the beast, but the strength and wisdom you gain in the meeting. Your life, in all its mundane and magnificent challenges, is the epic now being written. The screen glows with a vast, sun-drenched plain, and a lone wanderer stands before a creature of stone and living moss that moves with the grace of a walking cathedral. This is the world of a video game like Shadow of the Colossus, and here, the ancient script is rewritten in real time by the player's own hands. You are given a clear quest to defeat these 16 majestic giants, yet with each victory, a strange hollowness grows. The music swells not in triumph but in sorrow. The beasts are not attacking cities, they are simply existing, peaceful and immense in their forgotten landscapes. Your courage in climbing their fur and finding their weak points feels less like heroism and more like a violation, a necessary cruelty for a love you cannot fully understand. This interactive experience forces a revolutionary question. What if the mythic encounter's true test is not the strength to fight, but the emotional courage to question why you are fighting at all? The game transforms the player from a conquering hero into a complicated participant in a tragedy, using the controller to teach empathy through action, or rather, through the haunting consequence of action. This profound shift echoes through our modern stories. In the film The Shape of Water, the formidable other is not a beast to be slain, but a captured amphibian man to be understood and loved. The courage on display is not martial but intimate and defiant, the bravery to see profound beauty in a form the world calls a monster, and to risk everything to offer it kindness and freedom. Here, the creature is an endangered wonder, a relic of a wilder world held in a cold, clinical tank. The heroic act becomes one of protection and release, a direct inversion of the Slayer's tale. These narratives signal a cultural evolution in our relationship with the mythic blueprint. We are using the same framework, the human confronting the formidable other, to explore a more nuanced brand of valor. Courage is increasingly tied to empathy, to conservation, and to ethical understanding. It is the bravery to stay your hand, to question the orders from a distant king or a faceless institution, and to recognize that the greatest threat may not be the beast, but the system that labels it as such. The monstrous other is often portrayed as the last of its kind, a symbol of a fading natural mystery in a world of concrete and data. The courage required, therefore, shifts from domination to guardianship. It asks, do we have the fortitude to protect what we do not fully comprehend? Can we find the bravery to simply let something majestic be, to value its existence over our desire to conquer, catalog, or claim it? This is not a dismissal of traditional courage, but an expansion of its definition for a new age. Our myths are now filled with creatures who are mirrors not of our fear, but of our fragility and our capacity for wonder. They challenge us to find heroism in connection, in the quiet resolve to defend the misunderstood, and in the complex moral calculus of deciding who, in any given story, truly deserves the label of monster. The lair is no longer just a physical space to be breached. It is an ethical labyrinth where the right path is rarely clear, and the greatest weapon is often a compassionate heart. A creature's most profound power often lies not in its fangs, but in its address. It lives where one world bleeds into another. The three-headed hound Cerberus does not roam the fields of the living. He is stationed with absolute precision at the final river, the gate of the Greek underworld. The dragons of countless tales make their lairs not in the heart of the kingdom, but at the ragged edge of the map where the last village road dissolves into wilderness. These are the liminal beasts, the eternal sentinels of the threshold. Their domain is the in-between, the shoreline where wave meets sand, the tree line where sunlight gives way to shadow, the twilight hour that is neither day nor night. To seek them out is to deliberately approach a border, and to face them is to declare your intent to cross it. This specific placement transforms the monster from a random threat into a cosmic customs agent. Its purpose is to test the legitimacy of your passage. The courage it demands, therefore, is uniquely transitional, the bravery required to leave a familiar state of being and step into an unknown new one. Every major human transition, whether the biological shift of puberty, the social covenant of marriage, the solemn journey of a funeral rite, or the physical trek to a new homeland, was mirrored in these mythic gatekeepers. The beast embodies the clinging resistance of the old world, the comfort of the known, and the visceral fear of the unmapped territory ahead. Its roar is the collective voice of every doubt that asks, "Are you sure you are ready? Can you bear what lies beyond?" The act of overcoming this guardian, whether through combat, solving its riddle, or presenting the proper offering, was not mere adventure, it was a ceremonial blueprint. It ritualized the chaos of change into a manageable, symbolic event. A young person undergoing an initiation right in the forest was, in story logic, facing the spirit of the woods, proving they had the courage to leave childhood behind and re-enter the community as an adult. The dragon at the world's edge was the final test for the explorer, proving their resolve was strong enough to merit discovering what lay on the other side of the mountains. By framing these pivotal life passages as confrontations with threshold guardians, ancient cultures accomplished something deeply stabilizing. They normalized the terror of transformation. They said, yes, this is frightening, it is supposed to be, that fear has a shape and a name, and here is the traditional way our people have moved past it. This understanding recasts courage not as a static quality you possess, but as a dynamic force you activate, the vital energy that propels you across the chasm from one chapter of your life to the next. It is the fuel for becoming. The liminal beast, in all its terrifying majesty, ultimately serves the continuity of life itself. It ensures that growth is never accidental but earned. That every new beginning, from the personal to the cultural, is approached with a solemn respect and prepared heart such a profound act deserves. The guardian does not exist to stop the passage forever, but to guarantee that only those with the necessary resolve complete it, carrying the wisdom of the threshold with them into the world beyond. The triumphant roar of the hero echoes, but it drowns out another sound entirely, the silence of the fallen. For all their wisdom, these ancient stories share a profound limitation. They are almost exclusively told from one side, the perspective of the culture that felt threatened. We hear the hero's fears, the people's prayers, the bard's celebration. But what of the beast's own story? What if we dared to listen to the silence left in the wake of the vanquished? This is not about rewriting the myths, but about reading them with a modern, critical ear, leaning into the quiet spaces to hear a different kind of truth. Imagine for a moment the story a dragon might tell. From its ancient vantage point, coiled atop a mountain for centuries, It might not see a hoard of gold, but a sacred trust, a geological heart it was born to protect. The humans who arrive with swords and torches are not brave liberators, but noisy, greedy invaders, shattering a primordial peace to loot a relic they cannot possibly understand. The great serpent in the river is not a mindless devourer of boats, but the living spirit of the current itself, enforcing a natural law against those who would pollute its waters or take more fish than the ecosystem can bear. This shift in perspective is not just an intellectual game, it is itself a modern form of courage. It requires the intellectual bravery to deconstruct the narratives we have inherited, to question the hero's motives, and to empathize with the entity labeled as a monster. It challenges the comforting, simplistic binary of good versus evil, of hero versus villain. Suddenly, the clear path of the slayer becomes a tangled ethical forest. Was the act always necessary, or was it a tragic failure of communication, a violent imposition of one worldview upon another? This exercise in perspective-taking expands the ancient definition of courage into startling new territory. It suggests that true bravery can sometimes be found in complexity, in withholding judgment, and even in choosing not to fight. It is the courage to ask difficult questions before drawing a sword. What if the guardian beast's challenge was not a threat but a final warning, a test of the seeker's respect? What if the hero, in his unwavering certainty, failed the test? By listening for the silence of the vanquished, we engage with these myths on a level our ancestors might not have consciously intended, but one that resonates with urgent modern concerns. We begin to see reflections of colonial encounters, where advanced technologies and unshakable cultural confidence labeled indigenous peoples and their sacred lands as primitive or monstrous, to be conquered and reshaped. We see the roots of our environmental crisis, where the natural world, once personified as powerful spirits to be negotiated with, was reduced to a resource, its guardians slain in stories long before they were despoiled in reality. The ethical questions become unavoidable. When is a conflict a true defense of the innocent, and when is it a projection of fear onto a misunderstood other? This critical reading does not rob the old tales of their power, it deepens it. It transforms them from simple blueprints for action into complex mirrors for reflection. They become stories that teach us to look twice, to listen for the story we are not being told, and to find the courage to stand in the uncomfortable space between competing truths. The greatest heroic labor for our time may be this: to hold two conflicting perspectives in our mind at once, to feel the fear of the village and the rightful fury of the dragon, and from that tension to seek a wisdom more profound than any victory won by force alone. This alchemy of fear and fortitude was the original operating system for the human spirit. For millennia, the legendary beast served as the crucible, the necessary vessel where the base metal of terror could be heated, hammered, and reshaped into something stronger and more valuable. The process was not magic, but a precise narrative technology. By taking the formless dread of the dark forest and giving it the shape of a dragon with a vulnerable spot under its wing, storytellers performed a revolutionary act. They made the abstract manageable. They translated the paralyzing whisper of what if into a concrete question of how. How do you find the hidden path? How do you craft the special sword? How do you answer the riddle? This translation is everything. It shifts the human mind from a passive state of suffering a fear to an active state of solving a problem. The beast, in all its terrifying specificity, provided the focus. Its lair gave the fear an address. Its weakness offered a point of entry. In doing so, these myths made courage a skill that could be taught, a story that could be rehearsed, and a victory that could, in the realm of symbol, be achieved. This was collective wisdom codified into epic poetry. A community did not just tell a child to be brave when walking through the woods at dusk. They told the child the story of the guardian of the grove, explaining what offerings it accepted and what paths it protected. The lesson was embedded in character, conflict, and consequence. The child learned not just the instruction, but the entire story logic behind it, internalizing a pattern for behavior that felt ancient, tested, and true. This narrative technology built more than brave individuals, it forged cohesive cultures. Shared myths created a common symbolic language. When a chieftain spoke of facing the serpent of discord, everyone understood the kind of sprawling, regenerating challenge he meant. When an elder advised a young hunter to beware the wolf of reckless pride, the metaphor carried the weight of generations of cautionary tales. These archetypes became a cultural shorthand for complex emotional and social realities, allowing people to discuss hardship, conflict, and moral choice with a depth and immediacy that straightforward lecture could never achieve. The rituals that grew from these stories were the practical applications. The initiation rite where a youth faced a masked elder playing the forest spirit was not pretend, it was a lived simulation. It was the community providing a safe, structured container for a young person to physically and emotionally practice the act of confronting the formidable, to feel the rush of fear and the subsequent surge of mastery, all within a ceremonial framework that guaranteed their passage. They were downloading the hero's journey directly into muscle memory and social belonging. To call this mere entertainment misses its profound function. It was preventative social medicine, cognitive behavioral therapy woven into the fabric of campfire and ceremony. The stories acknowledged the darkness, the chaos of the world, the savagery within, the terror of the unknown, but they refused to let that be the final word. They insisted, through narrative, that a response was possible, that we could meet the gaze of the Gorgon indirectly through the mirror of wisdom, that we could navigate the labyrinth of our own secrets if we kept hold of a guiding thread. That we could face the winter of our hardships with the collective ritual of driving out the frost giant. The enduring, bone-deep power of these tales lies in this fundamental, elegant truth they encode, that humanity does not discover its strength by avoiding the shadows. We find it, we forge it, in the deliberate and meaningful encounter with what waits there. Our ancestors did not create heroes who were fearless. They created heroes who, with trembling hands and steadfast hearts, walked toward the roars in the dark, transforming the echo of those roars into the very songs that told us who we were and who we might yet become. Our journey through these layers and legends reveals a stunning truth. These were not simple monster tales, they were humanity's original textbooks on courage, written in the language of myth. Every creature, from the riddling sphinx to the world-shaping dragon Tiamat, served as a profound lesson. The internalized Wendigo taught the bravery of moral endurance, while the birth of Pegasus from Medusa's blood showed how terror could be alchemized into inspiration. Each narrative explored a different facet of valor, strategic, compassionate, collective, and deeply introspective. Together, they built a complete philosophy of bravery, one that understood courage is never the absence of fear, but the conscious, often difficult choice to act in spite of it. This action was rarely solitary. It was supported by wisdom passed down, by the aid of allies, and by a willingness to bear a personal cost for a greater good. These stories gave entire cultures a shared language for resilience, a way to talk about hardship, growth, and triumph that resonated from the flickering campfire to the family hearth. That language has never fallen silent. It echoes in our cinemas, our novels, and the very metaphors we use to describe our lives. We still speak of slaying dragons at work, of facing our inner demons, of navigating labyrinths of confusion. The framework is ancient, but the application is eternally new. As we confront our own modern beasts, the anxieties of uncertainty, the conflicts in our communities, or the private challenges that test our spirit, these myths offer a timeless reminder. The heart of courage remains unchanged across the millennia. It is not a shield that makes us invulnerable, but a forge. It is the transformative fire we must walk through when we choose to meet what frightens us most. So carry this insight forward. Look at the obstacles on your own path and see them for what they truly are, not as random misfortunes, but as your personal legendary beasts. Each one is a guardian at a threshold, a chaos to be ordered, a shadow to be integrated. In choosing to face them with whatever form of bravery they demand, you do something extraordinary. You step into the oldest and most heroic of human traditions, adding your story to the eternal epic of how we learn to be brave.